Brian and Jannelle mornings on with our friend and professor, Sean O'Connor. He's with Cedarville University, Assistant Professor of Digital Media. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Great. Man, it's not even been a month and it's already causing this controversy. That's Lightyear, Pixar's Lightyear?
That's right. So I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with Disney Pixar and the Toy Story movies, all those films that we love going to see. I love going to see. I've seen them pretty much since I was a kid. And their latest one is a spin-off movie about the Buzz Lightyear character from the Toy Story movies. It's called Lightyear, and it's kind of an origin story for the character set in space. They marketed the film as it's like the movie that Andy in Toy Story would have seen that would have prompted him to want the Buzz Lightyear doll. So it's very different from the other Toy Story movies. And I think because it's so different and because it's in theaters instead of on Disney Plus, it's been kind of confusing for some families as to what it's about and what the story behind it is and where to watch it. And because of that, it's made a lot less money than I think Disney was anticipating. But there's also a couple content issues in the film that are also drawing audiences away, especially families that might be listening to the program now. In terms of character in the film, there's a same-sex relationship in the film portrayed in a very positive light, and that was something that even as early as a few months ago was causing a lot of uproar.
People saw it coming, you saying, before it came out?
Well, I think what prompted it was there were the bills that happened in Florida back in March, the Don't Say Gay bills. I think Disney had a awkward response to it and kind of forced in, a couple elements of that relationship that weren't originally part of the movie, like a kiss between the couple and things like that, in order to make this political statement and try to align with certain people that were saying, hey, you need to make it, stand up for something. And in return, it's been kind of they've gotten the opposite response from other people saying, why is this in this kids movie?
Right.
My kids just, I think it's important that we talk about, why to see it, why not see it. Because I think a lot of families are going to have different responses.
So before we get into that, is this the first time Disney has done it, or is it the most explicit so far?
It, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the more explicit instances of this happening. I know, especially in the last maybe 5 years, occasionally there's a Disney film, Onward, for example, that'll have just a tiny little reference in the background, or a line of dialogue, or you see a same-sex couple in the background or something like that. And every once in a while, certain families notice and cause an uproar on social media. But this one you can't really avoid.
Wow. So what are your thoughts then in terms of Christian families making decisions? Should we watch it with our children?
Sure. Well, I think as far as this being kind of a new instance of this particular kind of content in this kind of film, it's certainly not the first time, as far as I'm concerned, that, a Disney movie or a kids movie, family-friendly movie has, something in it that would cause Christian families to pause and say, okay, should I be watching this with my kids? I can think of so many films, even the Disney's made, the last 20 years that had violence or certain language and things like that. And sometimes there would be reason and cause for concern for families to say, you know what, I'm going to skip on this movie for those reasons. Yeah. And in a way, this is kind of no different. It's maybe different material, different issues being addressed, but I think it's still a reason for families to prayerfully discern, okay, how do I spend my time with my kids? What movies or TV shows or whatever do I watch with them? And is this content beneficial? And I think some families will say, or some individuals even will say, like me, I can see a movie like Lightyear, and I did see it about a week ago, and I could, see that content in the film, and I say, okay, Bible says X, Y, and Z about this, so I'm just going to discard it and watch the rest of the movie, and that's that. Yeah. But a lot of people might not be able to do that. A lot of kids might not be able to do that, and I think it's important that parents understand and know their kids and know where their relationship with the Lord is and what their feelings are about certain issues, and be able to say, okay, I'm going to avoid this, or we're going to approach this, and we're going to talk about what it means and what the Bible has to say about these things.
Mm-hmm. I love this. And as we dig in, I mean, we have to kind of embrace the idea that avoiding it is becoming harder and harder. But Sean, it's hard now to avoid either scenes like this or movies around biblical things that are outside of our biblical worldview. So when we see these, how do we talk to our kids about it in a positive light?
I think the biggest thing, and I say this not as a parent, I don't have kids of my own yet, but I do. I mean, my students and I have these conversations, and I have these conversations with a lot of people. And we've talked about this on the show before. I think the main thing comes down to, I think it's important that we, as maybe movie fans or entertainment fans, whatever, know the Bible more than we know movies. Wow. I think that's something that when I was younger, I struggled with for a long time. And I think if we are able to prioritize God and his word and what he says about everything, then Jesus says in Matthew 6, we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Everything else will make sense in light of God's word. And so I think when a movie or TV show or whatever has that kind of content in it that maybe is objectionable, I think if we approach it from a biblical worldview first, then we can see, one, whether or not it's beneficial, but two, whether or not it's content that's worth avoiding based on how we know ourselves. I mean, you guys were talking about it on the program earlier about examining our own hearts, right?
Yeah.
And figuring out when there's controversial issues that come up in our family or in culture or whatever, am I communicating biblical truths for God's sake or for my own?
Yeah.
And it's very hard, the situation like this. I mean, I've certainly seen a lot of even, name calling on social media from both sides saying, if you see Lightyear, it means you're supporting this and you're bad. Or if you don't see Lightyear, not supporting, you're bad. It's just, it's terrible. But it all comes down to, I think, prioritizing our time with our families and with our children in God's word rather than entertainment. Because if they have that strong foundation, I hope that they will be able to say whether or not, content that's presented in a story like that is true to God's word, but also where are my issues personally with sin and what can I do to avoid those. And as Jesus says, cut off anything that's causing you to sin. And that has meant for me, at least, that there are some movies that I just don't go see because I know that they might be a stumbling block to me in terms of what content is in them. And I think that's okay. Yeah. I think if they're done with intentions of serving the Lord and loving the Lord, rather than, looking high and mighty maybe to other people, if it's with the intention of serving the Lord, I think that's a good thing.
Sean, one of the things that I think the controversy coming out before a lot of people see it can be helpful is that as a parent, what's coming up. And if you feel like your child will be able to see this movie without it, being a total devastation, what's coming, and you can be prepared to discuss that afterwards in the context of what you've seen, rather than if you're out at a restaurant and happen to be at a booth next to a gay couple making out, or you go downtown and happen to stumble upon a pride parade or something, and those can be very flamboyant and in your face. That might catch you by surprise, and you wouldn't know what to do or how to say. But here, at least it's coming, and you can be prepared.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's something that if a parent is seeking to decide whether or not they should see a film or if their kids should see a film, I mean, there are so many resources online that they can look to first just to learn more. I know Focus on the Family has some great resources just talking about a movie's content and what's in it and what are the lessons being taught and the morals being taught. And I think that's important. I think that's going the extra mile, hopefully, for friends or children or whoever, just to say, like, before we go see this movie, let me know what's in it before we go see something that might be objectionable, or we make a blanket judgment call on a movie that might present biblical truths, but also have certain content, language, or whatever that isn't biblical. I think there's so many movies that I find myself saying, okay, this is a truth that's in this movie that God's word says is correct. And, even non-Christians can make movies that present biblical truths because he, set eternity in the hearts of men, as we say, if we read in the Bible, and man is without excuse in Romans. And so I think it's possible. But I also think, it's a great thing to consider for parents, just to read up before they make those judgment calls and to pray about it. And I appreciate, when my parents did that when I was a kid, and I know several other families that did that. And, I'm certainly not bitter that I missed out on certain movies as a kid because of those things.
Yeah.
But I think it's prioritizing the right things.
Now, Sean, if a parent were to try to avoid having their children see any kind of outward sin like that on TV, on movies, on public media of all sorts, how would that child develop? Do you think their worldview would be a little bit distorted?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, but I think it's going to be very hard for us to engage with the changing culture if we don't know, what's in it, and we suddenly go out into the world. Like, student is protected all through high school and college, even from different, moral values or whatever. And then as soon as they graduate, they're in a new world that they say, oh, this is interesting. Certainly not what God says is true, but, maybe that's appealing to them. And I think it's one thing to protect students or children, whoever, from certain things. But I think if we completely do that, we eliminate opportunities to engage with culture and preach the gospel. And again, it's a very complicated issue, and it takes time. And again, it takes knowing God's word more than we know the culture or love the culture, and being able to say, okay, this issue needs to be fixed, and here's what God says about this. But I think to an extent, I mean, there should be conversations that happen, between parents and kids about here's what's going on in the world, and here's what's this issue's about, and here's what's in this movie maybe that God's word says is true, or it says it's not true, and here's why, and here's what Jesus says about it. I think those conversations, we talk a lot on this program when I come on about just having conversations and dialoguing about these kinds of things, rather than just letting the kids watch whatever they want. I think that's important.
Yeah. I like what you said, especially about preparing them to go into a world that does not have a biblical worldview. Yeah. So can you just share some final thoughts on, if you do decide to watch this movie, or even as you continue to kind of wrestle through the different media choices, especially with older teens, how can you watch it and have productive conversations in a way that helps them grow?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's funny that Lightyear as a movie is not really, it's not like a groundbreaking film by any means, which is funny when an average movie causes up so much discussion like this. But there are certainly themes and storylines in that film besides that supporting characters, plot points or whatever that talk about the value of teamwork and not isolating yourself and collaborating with other people in order for the sake of the mission rather than just going alone. And I think, there are important, values of friendship and camaraderie that a film like that portrays that I think are worth, watching and talking about. But whether or not they're worth, also exposing students or children or whoever to certain kinds of content, it's going to be probably a judgment call based on you or the parent or whoever. But still, I think there are, beneficial things. But I also would remind myself and others that a movie's entertainment value is not necessarily worth, being presented certain content that goes against what God's word says. I think it's important to remember.
Sounds great. Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're listening to Professor Sean O'Connor. He's assistant professor at Cedarville University, and he teaches students on digital media. So keep that in mind if you have a child that's interested in that. Thank you. And if people want to reach out to you with questions or to ask for resources, how can they reach out?
They can find me on the Cedarville University website. Just type my name in, or you can find my email, soconnor@cedarville.edu. I'd be more than happy to start a conversation with any of our listeners. So thank you so much.
Sounds great. You can also go to brianandjannelle.org, and we'll connect you if you didn't get that. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much.